All right, so today we are going deep on a topic that I know a lot of you have been wanting us to cover.
Yeah, this is a big one. Indefinite leave to remain, or ILR, in the UK.
That's right. Basically, it's this thing where if you're a migrant and you've been living in the UK for 5 years on certain types of visas, you could apply to stay permanently.
Exactly, and that's where things get interesting, right? Because it's not just about staying, it's about what comes with that permanent status, like access to public services, benefits, the whole nine yards.
It's definitely become a bit of a hot potato issue. I mean, just look at the title of the YouTube video we're using as our source material today. Indefinite leave to remain is wrecking the UK.
Wow, they don't mince words, do they? Straight from the UK Visa and Immigration Updates channel.
No, they do not. And that's kind of what makes this deep dive so important, right? We need to look beyond those strong opinions and really unpack what's going on with ILR. What are the facts? What are the different perspectives? And ultimately, what does it all mean?
Exactly. We need to equip our listeners with the knowledge to form their own informed opinions.
All right, so let's start with the fundamentals. Can you break down exactly what ILR is?
Sure. So, as we said, it's the right to settle permanently in the UK. You become eligible after 5 years on a work visa or a family visa.
Okay, so it's not like you just show up and boom, you've got ILR. There's a process, a waiting period.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And during that time, you're expected to meet certain requirements, like proving your financial stability and good character.
Gotcha. And then once you have ILR, what changes? What does it actually mean in practical terms?
Well, it basically opens the door to a lot of things. You can work without restrictions. You can access public funds like healthcare and education. Your kids, if they're born in the UK, can become British citizens.
So it's really about building a life in the UK, putting down roots. But the video we're looking at, they clearly have some issues with this whole system.
Right. They argue that this system, the way it's set up, doesn't have strong enough social contracts.
Social contract.
Yeah, basically, it's like this unspoken agreement between the people and the government. You pay your taxes, you contribute to society, and in return, you get certain benefits and protections.
Okay, I see. So they're saying that with ILR, maybe that balance is off. Maybe people are getting the benefits without necessarily holding up their end of the bargain.
That's their argument. They say that it leads to what they call unchecked entitlement.
Hmm, interesting. And they specifically point to something called the Boris wave. What is that all about?
So the Boris wave refers to this period, mostly under Boris Johnson's leadership, when immigration to the UK really surged.
Why did that happen?
Well, a few reasons. They relaxed some of the rules around work visas. Like, they got rid of this thing where companies had to try to hire British workers first before looking overseas.
Oh, so it made it easier for companies to bring in workers from abroad.
Exactly. And that, combined with other factors, led to a pretty dramatic increase in immigration, over 900,000 people per year.
900,000, that's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, it's a big number. And the video argues that this influx, particularly with people who might eventually get ILR, has put a massive strain on things like public services and the economy.
Speaking of strain on the economy, they mentioned this pretty eye-popping figure of a 234 billion pound burden.
Right. That comes from a report by the Center for Policy Studies. Their claim is that this is the net cost of immigration to the UK, which is like more than we spend on defense and education put together.
Yeah, they actually broke it down to like 8,200 pounds per household. I mean, obviously that would be a huge impact on taxpayers. But, I do wonder how they came up with that figure. I mean, it's such a big number, and this video is definitely pushing a particular agenda.
Yeah, that's a valid point. They don't go into much detail about the methodology behind that 234 billion pound number. So it's definitely worth taking with a grain of salt. Like, what are they including in those calculations? What assumptions are they making?
Right, always good to be a bit skeptical. But even we acknowledge that there's some nuance to that figure, it does raise the question, what can be done? If there are these concerns about ILR and its impact, what solutions are people proposing?
Well, the video suggests a few reforms. One is to lengthen the waiting period for ILR. Instead of 5 years, maybe make it 7 or even 10.
So basically make people prove they're really serious about settling in the UK.
Exactly.
Okay, that's one idea. What else?
Another proposal is to be stricter about integration, like make people pass tougher language tests, show they have a steady job history, maybe even demonstrate that they understand and are adopting British culture.
That sounds a bit tricky. I mean, how do you define British culture? And wouldn't that potentially make it harder for people to get ILR, even if they're genuinely trying to integrate?
Yeah, it's definitely a sensitive issue. You have to strike a balance between setting reasonable expectations and not creating barriers that are too high.
I guess the question is, what does integration really mean? And how can we encourage it in a way that's fair and inclusive?
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where people feel welcomed and supported, but also understand that there are certain expectations that come with living in a new country.
Makes sense. Anything else on their reform list?
They also talk about cracking down on criminal activity among migrants. Basically, if you commit a crime, you could lose your ILR status.
I mean, that seems reasonable. Everyone should be subject to the law, regardless of their immigration status. Okay, so we've talked about the arguments and the proposed solutions, but there's also this political angle, right?
Right. The video mentions that some conservative politicians are really pushing for these reforms, but Labor hasn't really said much about it.
Interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, immigration is always a bit of a political minefield. It's an issue that people feel very strongly about, and it can be hard to find common ground. Maybe Labor is trying to figure out where they stand before taking a firm position.
Yeah, they might be trying to see how public opinion is shaping up before they commit to anything. It makes you think, how much of this debate is really about policy and how much is about politics?
Good question. I mean, obviously, elections are coming up, and immigration is often a key issue that influences how people vote. So both parties are probably thinking about how their stance on ILR will play with voters.
It's complex, isn't it? We've
Yeah.
covered a lot of ground here, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface. What are your final thoughts for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is to remember that this is a nuanced issue. There are valid concerns on both sides, and finding a solution that works for everyone is going to require thoughtful discussion and a willingness to compromise.
Absolutely. It's not just about listening to one video or reading one article and forming an opinion. It's about seeking out different perspectives, understanding the complexities, and then deciding for yourself where you stand.
Exactly. And I think the question we should all be asking ourselves is this: how do we, as a society, create an immigration system that is fair, that is sustainable, and that benefits both the people who are already here and those who are hoping to make the UK their home?
That's a million-dollar question, isn't it? And one that we'll continue to grapple with, I'm sure. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening. And keep those brain cogs turning.
We'll catch you next time.